Sign the statement. Tell them you were driving. That was the first thing my brother said to me after the airbag dust settled. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just, sign the statement. Tell them you were driving. I was still shaking. My hands were in my lap and I couldn't make them stop. The windshield had a spiderweb crack running all the way from the passenger side, which was the side I'd been sitting on, which is the only reason I even knew, in those first foggy seconds, that I wasn't the one behind the wheel. My brother, I'll call him by what he was that night, which was a 28-year-old man who'd had 6 beers at a backyard party and then decided he was fine to drive my car, was already out of the vehicle. He was pacing. He had his phone out. And when I finally got the door open and stood up on shaky legs, he grabbed my arm and said it again. Just say you were driving. You didn't see the stop sign. That's all. I want to tell you I said no immediately. I want to tell you I looked him in the eye and said absolutely not and pulled out my own phone and called 911. But I didn't. Because here's the thing about growing up the way I grew up. When your family has spent 25 years teaching you that your job is to make problems disappear quietly, the habit runs deeper than you think. I should tell you about my car first, because it matters. I bought that car myself. I worked 30 hours a week at a physical therapy clinic while finishing my nursing degree, and every paycheck I didn't spend on rent or groceries went into a savings account I'd labeled Freedom Fund on my banking app. It took me 2 years and 4 months. I remember the day I drove it off the lot, a Saturday in March, gray sky, a little cold, and I sat in the parking lot of a CVS on the way home just to sit in it alone for a minute, just to feel what it felt like to own something that was mine. My brother had a car. He totaled it 8 months earlier. Our parents paid to fix it. He blew a stop sign that time too, but it was a fender bender in a parking lot and nobody was hurt, and my father said, "Boys will be boys, he just needs to slow down a little." I didn't say anything then either. The party that night was at a friend's place about 20 minutes from our parents' house. My brother had tagged along because my parents asked me to take him. He'd been having a rough few weeks, they said. He needed to get out. I agreed because it was easier to agree. He drank from the moment we walked in. I watched him. I counted. Around beer number 4, I went over and said quietly, "I'm going to drive us home." He waved me off. "I'm fine. Relax. I'm not arguing about it. Give me the keys when you're ready to leave." He gave me a look, that specific look he'd been giving me our whole lives, the one that said, "You're so dramatic," and turned back to his conversation. When we left at midnight, I held out my hand for the keys. He hesitated. I thought he was going to hand them over. Instead, he said, "It's literally a 15-minute drive. Just get in." And I got in. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds, and I've spent a lot of hours since then sitting with the fact that I made a choice in that parking lot, and that choice had consequences. But I also know that I spent my whole life being told that pushing back wasn't worth it, that the scene I'd make would be worse than the risk, that I was overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I should have made the scene. The crash happened about 6 minutes from our parents' house. He ran a red light, not a yellow he misjudged, a flat red, and clipped the front end of a sedan crossing through the intersection. We spun and hit the curb. The other driver was okay. Shaken, but okay. My brother didn't have a scratch on him. My neck ached where the seatbelt had locked across my collarbone. I'd know later that I had a bruise the full width of my chest from the shoulder restraint. But in the moment, I just felt dazed and cold. And then I heard my brother's voice. "Tell them you were driving." I don't know how my parents got there before the police did. To this day, I don't know. My father must have gotten a call the second it happened because he was pulling up to the intersection while I was still standing on the sidewalk with my arms wrapped around myself. He took one look at the scene and then he came straight to me, not to my brother, to me, and he put both hands on my shoulders and said, "You were driving, you got confused and ran the light. That's the story, don't complicate this." I remember looking at him, like actually looking at him, trying to find something in his face that was a father and not just a fixer. There was nothing. "He's got a record," my father said quietly. "One more thing and he loses his license. He's finally got a job interview lined up. He's trying to get himself together. Do you understand what you'd be doing to him?" I understood. I understood perfectly. He was asking me to hand over the next chapter of my life so his son could keep writing his. My mother arrived 2 minutes later. She barely looked at the car. She went to my brother, held his face in her hands, and said, "Are you hurt?" He said no. She said, "Good. Let your sister handle this." That sentence, I've turned it over so many times. Let your sister handle this. Like I was a service. Like I was a function the family used when something needed absorbing. When the police officer came over to take my statement, my father was standing 3 feet behind me. My mother had her hand on my arm. My brother was leaning against my father's car looking at his phone. I opened my mouth, and I said, "I'm not sure yet. I'm a little disoriented. Can I have a few minutes?" It wasn't a yes. It also wasn't a no. The officer said, of course, checked on me medically, and went to speak to the other driver. My father, the moment the officer walked away, smart. "Okay, here's what you say." I walked away from him. I sat down on the curb by myself, and I put my face in my hands, and I tried to think. Here's what I had going for me, even if I couldn't fully see it yet. 3 weeks earlier, I'd had my dash cam professionally installed. It was a dual lens model, front and rear facing, hardwired into the car's battery, with a subscription to automatic cloud backup. I'd gotten it because the parking lot at the hospital where I worked had had a string of hit and runs. I'd basically forgotten about it, but it had been running the entire drive, and it had uploaded automatically to my account at 11:58 p.m. I didn't think about that right away. I was in shock. I was being pressured from 3 directions, and there was a police officer asking questions. What I thought about was smaller. He was driving. Everyone at that intersection knew it. The other driver had seen it. And somewhere in the back of my mind, underneath the fog and the fear, something was saying, "You don't have to do this." I ended up giving a statement that night that was technically accurate and almost entirely useless. I said I hadn't been feeling well, that I was confused about the sequence of events, that I'd need to speak with someone before I could say more. The officer looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. My father looked at me with an expression I could read perfectly. Fury. In the car on the way home, my father's car, my car was undrivable. My brother sat in the back seat and didn't say a single word to me. My mother told me I'd done the right thing. My father said we'd get the story straight in the morning. I sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at the highway and thought about that cloud backup. The next 4 days were the worst of my adult life, and I've had some bad ones. My father hired a lawyer, a real one, expensive, the kind with a corner office, and the lawyer came to the house and sat in the living room and explained to me that if I claimed I had been driving, the most I'd likely face was a traffic fine and a note on my insurance. Given the circumstances, he said, looking at his leather portfolio, it's a manageable outcome. Manageable for whom, I didn't ask out loud. My brother sat across from me and didn't meet my eyes. My parents flanked me on the couch like guards. The lawyer said there was one complication. The other driver, an older man named, well, I'll call him the gentleman across the intersection, had told the responding officer that he believed the driver was a male. My father had an answer for this. He said that I'd been mistaken for my brother from a distance, that I have short hair, that it was dark. He'd clearly already thought this through. Then the lawyer said something that stopped me cold. There's also the question of the dash cam footage. Do you have one installed? My father frowned. No, I said nothing. The lawyer moved on. I went upstairs that night, and I sat on my bed, and I pulled up the Cloud app on my phone, which my parents had tried to take and I'd refused, and that fight had been its own nightmare, and I watched the footage. 41 minutes of driving, my brother in the driver's seat, face visible at every lit intersection, his hands on my steering wheel, me in the passenger seat, the red light, the impact. And then, this is the part I wasn't expecting, the audio of the immediate aftermath. His voice, completely clear, saying, "Just say you were driving. You didn't see the stop sign, that's all." I watched it twice. Then I downloaded a copy to my phone and emailed it to myself and backed it up to a second Cloud account. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In those 3 weeks, my parents made my life very small. They stopped covering my health insurance, which they'd been helping with while I finished a certification. They told me they'd spoken to the leasing office of my apartment building, a building my father partially owned, and that my lease might not be renewed. They took my brother out to dinner twice and didn't invite me. My mother called me every other day with small cutting remarks about how selfish I was being. The thing is, and I've talked about this with my therapist at length since, I think they genuinely believed I would fold. I think they had never once seen me refuse them completely, and they'd extrapolated from all my previous half measures that I was the kind of person who would, eventually, give in. They weren't entirely wrong. I almost did. Twice. The first time was around day 10, when my mother called crying and said my brother had been having panic attacks and wasn't sleeping, and did I understand what I was doing to the family? I was standing in my kitchen and I almost said, fine. I had the word in my mouth. I hung up and opened my cloud app and watched the footage again. The second time was the night before the hearing. My brother texted me, the first direct communication in 3 weeks. It said, "You know I love you, right? I'm scared. Please." I sat with that for a long time. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. He's my brother. I've loved him my whole life, even when he was careless with that love. And I genuinely believe he was scared. But I also thought about the older gentleman whose car I'd seen in the accident photos. I thought about what would have happened if someone had been in the crosswalk. I thought about what my father had said at the scene, "Don't complicate this," and how he'd meant, "Don't complicate this for us." I texted back, "I know, I love you too, but I can't." The morning of the hearing, I wore my gray blazer and I brought a folder with 3 printed copies of my insurance documents, the dashcam installation receipt, and a USB drive. My parents were already in the courthouse hallway when I arrived. My father looked at me the way you look at someone you've already decided something about. My mother didn't look at me at all. My brother was in a suit. He looked young in it, younger than 28. He looked like a kid who'd borrowed his father's clothes. The family lawyer swept over and said, "We're glad you're here. Judge Parrish is known for being," and I stepped around him and found a seat on my own side of the aisle. When the hearing began, the other driver's attorney spoke first. He laid out their account. A male driver, visible through the windshield, ran a red light. My parents' lawyer objected that the witness's sightline was impaired. There was some back and forth. Then it was our turn. My parents' lawyer stood up and began laying out their version. I was driving. I was stressed. I'd been experiencing anxiety related to professional pressures. He used the phrase momentary lapse 4 times. I counted. The judge, and I want to tell you about Judge Parrish for a moment because she mattered, looked like someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had heard every version of every story and found most of them tiresome. She had reading glasses on a chain and a yellow legal pad, and she took notes in small, precise handwriting. When my parents' lawyer finished, she looked up and she looked directly at me. She said, "Would you like to make a statement?" I said yes. I stood up and I said I had footage from my dashcam that I believed was relevant to the question of who was driving. I said the camera had been professionally installed 3 weeks before the accident and had